So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the series of John Harper Publishing webinars on EU public affairs. Before we kick off, I'll do a little bit of a housekeeping and just let you know how today is going to run. So firstly, to introduce myself, I'm Nick DaCosta. I'll be hosting today's webinar. What we're going to do is we've got three fantastic presentations by our contributors. So what we'll be doing first is introduction from John Harper of John Harper Publishing. We'll then be going into three presentations from our fantastic contributors. And at the end, we will have time for a Q&A session as well. So if you have any questions, please do pop them into the chat and we will endeavour to get the questions answered. We'd like, if possible, the questions to be directed to one of the contributors so that we can make sure we get the question answered by the right person, but also that we give the opportunity for as many questions as possible. Obviously, the topic is a very interesting one, so we want an opportunity for as many people to ask questions and share the expertise and experience of our panelists. For your information, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the John Harper Publishing website after the event. So would encourage those of you who found it as interesting as I'm sure it will be to get your colleagues and friends to watch the video, but also, of course, importantly, to purchase the two books, How the EU Institutions Work and How to Work with the EU Institutions, known as the Orange and Purple Book. So with that in mind, I would like to hand over to John Harper of John Harper Publishing to give a brief introduction. John, over to you. As inevitable is in this day of Zoom meetings and Zoom events, it seems that we have a little bit of a technical issue. I think the most used phrase of 2020 was "Can you hear me?", which is very applicable to our new way of Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars. So on that note, I will hand over to Alan Hardacre. Alan is a EU public affairs leader and published the Purple Book, How to Work with EU Institutions. We're also joined by João Sousa, who works with the Public Affairs Council EU office, and Roland Moore, Senior Director at BCW Global. On that note, as we unfortunately have lost John, we will hand over to Alan Hardacre to start us off. Alan, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nick, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Nick mentioned, my name is Alan Hardacre. I had the pleasure of editing the, as Nick says, the Purple Book, so the How to Work with the EU Institutions and a Practical Guide to Successful Public Affairs in the EU. Now, today I am going to kick off proceedings by setting a bit of a framework, actually, for both João and Roland to pick up with further recommendations. As I just want to look at some of the basics of the opportunities and challenges that are faced by third countries. And that's either by third countries directly themselves or by you as a company industry consultant trying to work with or through third countries in the EU. Now, before I do that, let me just quickly set a little bit of context. Now, working with the EU institutions and EU decision-making is already a complex undertaking for EU member states themselves and for EU stakeholders across Europe. Now, all of them, whether they be a member state, a company, a German, French, Spanish, wherever they come from, they're all presented with unique opportunities and challenges that they need to address. And what I mean by this is challenges and opportunities related to access, leverage, resources, network, skills, knowledge, and likely financial resources. And it's basically how you manage all of this that leads to your chances of success. And this is no different for the 164 third country missions and embassies and their stakeholders, companies, NGOs, and others who are trying to work in Brussels. Now, together, this 164 third country missions and embassies represents a large and powerful stakeholder across a full spectrum of EU activities. Individually, when it comes to individual country missions and embassies and their efforts in Brussels, it very much depends on how they address their specific situation. So, Nick, if we could move to the next slide, let us start by looking at some of the opportunities that third countries have. Now, on the left-hand side in the table, just sort of highlighting 5 major opportunity areas. And I'd like now just to sort of to pull that down to three specific areas that I think, or in fact, two themes that come out of this. So the first is, and this covers a number of the points on the table on the left, and it's a very important point, is third countries have privileged access. So be it the diplomatic status, the links with the European External Action Service, the EP delegations, or in fact the alliances, networks, contacts that they have from broader diplomatic scene of interacting with the EU. They have excellent access opportunity, much more so than an average EU stakeholder would ever have. Now, an opportunity is one thing, obviously, but the opportunity needs to be understood, it needs to be mapped, it needs to be managed, and it needs to be leveraged carefully. Access, of course, in itself does not guarantee or mean success, and it is also a card that can be overplayed. But quite simply, being able to access the right people is a crucial part of one of the key EU success equations, which is meeting the right person at the right time with the right information. So this privileged access cuts across all of the institutions and is something that represents, if used correctly, a large opportunity. And that can either be directly through the mission, or if you're a company working or a consultant working through or with a third country, obviously you can gain access and leverage this in the same way. The second thing I would point out here as a major opportunity is what I would call networks. The biggest part of this relates to the likely existence of an EU network of missions, embassies, perhaps also businesses and NGOs of that said country across the EU. This is a huge opportunity that, with some coordination, organization and leadership, can turn into a quite a powerful engagement platform. Now, if you extend this network concept into the international context where different countries likely interact with the EU in other countries, but also in other international fora, then you can basically see how there is the potential here to find a wealth of relationships, points of access, information and influence that can be leveraged. Now, I think this access needs to be understood. It also needs to be mapped, and then it's going to require some investment and organization to be able to leverage it effectively. But if ever there was an area where a third country would see a return on investment, it would surely be in this particular area. So that was my first set, just looking at some of the broad opportunities. Let me continue setting the scene by looking at some of the specific challenges. So Nick, if you could roll us on to the next slide, thank you. So, to some of the opportunities, you'll see now that they're going to be mitigated to some extent by some of the challenges that third countries often face. Again, I've just listed 5 on the table on the left-hand side, and this time I want to focus on 3 themes that I think come out of the challenges that they face. The first is what I would call empowering people. So like almost all organizations engaging in the EU, the human resource aspect is a challenge. So having enough skilled people and being able to retain them is quite simply not as easy as it may sound. So for third countries, the fact that there is a 3, 4, 5 yearly rotation of staff, sometimes all of the staff, is a very big challenge. In short, not having people who are empowered to do the job will quite simply diminish the ability to push influence and to leverage some of the opportunities we've just seen. There are a number of ways that this can be addressed. So a number of third countries have started to engage local staff who act as an anchor point, an institutional memory, or an EU expert at the heart of a mission and embassy's work to give some consistency over time. Long-standing consultancy relationships can also serve the same purpose by acting, again, as a long-term, consistent institutional memory. The third thing, which obviously can be very difficult, and companies also have this, is the need for robust handovers. This can be facilitated by technology. There are certain platforms that I'm going to come back to in a second that would help this. And then also, lastly, by training and coaching. Practical skills-based coaching I think would be the preference, as opposed to just trying to go to the College of Europe for a week. As good as it is, that's not really going to cut it. The second theme I would highlight here is lobbying skills and this notion of lobbyist and diplomats. In my experience, diplomatic staff do not like to be referred to in any way, shape or form as doing lobbying, as being lobbyists, which is fine. Okay, absolutely. I can understand the sensitivity, but I think that if they want to achieve success in the EU, they need to understand and adapt EU lobbying techniques and skills. Or at the very least, they need to know enough about them to be able to buy them in and deploy them correctly. So there is a mentality piece here about understanding the EU environment and how to operate, which is a bit more than knowledge and skills, as important as they are. This is very much related to a mindset challenge. And then lastly, in terms of challenges, and it relates to one of the opportunities, that's the access opportunity, one of the key three pieces there. If you've got access to the right people at the right time, you understand the process, and thirdly, you need the right information. And this is then linking to effective support from back home. So like all organizations who have to operate with their headquarters, third countries have their capitals to deal with and all the different ministries from whom they require input. So access is only effective if backed up by solid information, positions, and data. And much of this is obviously going to have to flow into the Brussels arena from back home. So this is all about education, context, relationships. It's another area where clearly the embassy is going to have to invest time in ensuring that it gets what is required. So those are an outline of some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. So if we just move to the final slide, just want to make a couple of points here in terms of what successful public affairs for a third country can look like. Now, some of the more specific recommendations are presented in the visual on the screen, which basically give some ideas of how a third country can adapt against the ideal methodology for building a public affairs strategy. And I don't intend to go into those in detail. Again, I just want to stay relatively top line for the purpose of this webinar. And come back to three things. I've mentioned them all before, but I think I need to come back to them. So the first is, I mentioned earlier, empowered resources. So I know I flagged this as a key challenge, but it's important to I think finish on this as I hand over to Zhao and Roland, is every third country has to find a robust, effective, fast and cost-effective way to get its people up to speed. There is simply no two ways about that. This is absolutely crucial. Only then will the people be able to leverage the opportunities and face the challenges that each and every country will find itself in. So this can be done pre and on the job through training, which I would suggest should be much more skills and practical based than knowledge based. And I think a very good way that I know some missions and embassies have had success with is moving this towards more of a practical coaching, so more sort of between consultancy coaching that is not just imparting information, but it's trying to build up the capability of the people as it goes along. So they train on the job. The second one then relates to the EU network. This is such a potential asset that investment in this area should be prioritized, no matter how big or challenging this may appear. The leverage, information, networks, and ultimately opportunities to influence merit this being undertaken. So by taking a central directional coordinating role, the EU mission and embassy can develop a very sustainable ongoing asset. And then thirdly, to enable both of those two, the empowering people and the EU network side of things, I think there is an absolute need, as there is with many organizations in the public affairs field today, to look at the role of technology as an enabler to help them do more and do it better. So there are platforms out there today that can help third countries address these the issues such as staff rotation, robust handovers, while simultaneously allowing sort of contact database, contact management software to empower the network. So, platforms such as Fiscal Note and Quorum, two that come to mind that can make a huge difference in underpinning the work they do. So I think these should be definitely areas that should be investigated. So hopefully that sets the scene of some of the challenges and opportunities that third countries face. I'm now going to pass you over to Joe, who is going to start moving into some best practices for third countries. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Alan. Do you hear me okay? And do you see me okay?
Sure do.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much, Alan, and thanks to the John Harper Publishing team for the invitation. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and speak to you a little bit about a topic I find quite interesting. So my name is João Sousa. I work with the Public Affairs Council European Office, not to confuse with other councils existing in Brussels. So the Public Affairs Council is, well, I will present this in a second, but basically I work here and I manage not only our European office, but also our global public affairs practice. And before this, I worked with the External Action Service missions in the Western Balkans and in the Democratic Republic of Congo as head of communication, based both in Brussels and in these regions. Now I'm with the Public Affairs Council. As I said, the Council is an international association for public affairs professionals, and our mission is to provide members with opportunities for peer-to-peer discussions, sharing best practices, and have the executive education that they need to succeed while maintaining the highest ethical standards. So as I said, I find this topic is really interesting, and as an entry point to my presentation, let me perhaps raise again the question, why would it be different for third countries to lobby the EU in comparison to EU countries, so non-EU countries in comparison to EU countries? As Alan mentioned, the art and science of lobbying is very much similar, like doing a lobbying plan, stakeholder and issues mapping, but the challenges and opportunities that Alan highlighted are specific for third countries, as is their position in the overall EU landscape. So the departing point is quite different, and this impacts the way these countries lobby. So what I'm going to discuss briefly in the minutes ahead is a few best practices or good practices for non-EU countries in 3 areas: understanding your environment, getting to action in lobbying, and good practices in communication. So when it comes to understanding your environment, this is really the first thing that you need to know and you need to understand. You need to know where you come from, what's your place in the overall EU matrix, and what you can realistically achieve. Of course, there is a wide disparity between organizations and countries and companies lobbying in the EU. They will all have different leverages and interests, resources, and objectives. But you need to know where you stand in this matrix and what your objectives are. And the first step here is really to know the who and the how. So know the actors and know the process. What processes are you trying to influence, where they're taking place inside the institutions, and who your stakeholders are. So for example, if enlargement is a topic that is interesting for you, then you need to know who are your interlocutors at the EAS, who in the Council of the EU and say in the Western Balkans working group is relevant for you, who are the MEPs and the country delegations in the European Parliament that are relevant for this issue, and so on. So you need to establish this network. The good news is, as Alan was mentioning, that if you work for a public administration of your country or region, you'll likely find open doors and people happy to give you references on other people to meet. And increasingly, I think EU officials are aware that many of the challenges that they're facing require a coordination also with non-EU actors. So they will be in principle available to engage. So that's one. The second thing is, knowing the policy process and the actors, that's just part of the story. You also need to know what the issues are for those actors that make them tick, and what you have to offer in those areas that could help, that could lead to a win-win situation. So in other words, you have to help your interlocutors help you. It's good to be aware of the themes that are high on the EU agenda, like sustainability, the Green Deal, the digital agenda, human rights and inclusion, now the whole post-COVID recovery plan, and see how your priorities tie into your interlocutors' priorities. So basically give them the arguments to defend you internally, and to make a case for you internally, and see how your priorities fit theirs. And perhaps the third thing that you should consider as you are trying to assess your environment and how to approach your interlocutors is to focus on discussing issues rather than politics. Removing politics out of the equation, and with all the sensitivities that politics generates, can make negotiations possible and increase your chances of success. At the same time, you should bear in mind that the extent to which different member states and MEPs feel concerned about your issue will be very different. National political dynamics change, as do public opinions in different countries. And these changes are very much beyond your control. So you see, for example, what happened last year during as the EU was considering open accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. They saw the door being blocked by France and by other EU countries. There was a quite somber mood among EU and the third countries. And it was speculated at the time that France's position was in part linked to domestic politics and domestic public opinion. Eventually, a few months later, France removed its veto, and the process was allowed to continue. As it happens, the countries still didn't get the green light yet from the EU foreign ministers. But I think what this points to is that on the one hand, you should, as much as possible, try to remove politics out of the equation, and then at some point be aware that the EU's complexity and sensitivities of different member states is sometimes beyond your control. You may find closed doors, have a plan B, and simply continue to engage with the process as the broader politics unfolds. So this is about trying to better understand your environment. And if we go to the next slide, please, Nick. We will get into a second area, which I think is obviously very important you consider, which is good practices in public affairs. So you mapped your place, and now it's time to get into action. And I would highlight a few good practices here. One of them, and perhaps the most important one, is to not go at it alone whenever possible. And Alan referred to this, and also the book expands quite a bit on how to do your stakeholder mapping and other important procedures when you're thinking about who you can partner with. You will almost always be more successful if you rely on your network and partner with others, be they other countries or companies or associations or the diaspora or others. And that's especially true if you don't have the resources of large companies or large countries. So if you're a company from a non-EU country, working with associations is a tool that you should definitely explore. It gives you more firepower when it comes to influencing legislation and policy debates. And quite a few associations are open to non-EU members as well, with different perhaps privileges, but still you can use the network and be part of the debate. You can also use chambers of commerce, for example, like AmCham EU or the CBL ACP Chamber of Commerce. That's the Chamber of Commerce between Belgium, Luxembourg, and the countries from Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific, which is also an interesting idea to try to open doors among potential partners in the private sector and expand your network. If you're a country, then it's a good idea to align with other countries that share the same interests and issues as you. So use the leverage of international fora like, again, the ACP network, which has a secretariat in Brussels, or the ECOWAS, community of West African states, the International Organization of French-speaking countries. These are different fora based in Brussels or in nearby European capitals that can really help leverage your influence and help you get connected. So it's really important to try to look for partnership and alliances. Another idea that I would like to put out there is, to explore as much as possible the possibility of a Brussels visit for your principal back home. And the Brussels visit is really an opportunity for everyone, for your organization and your principal, because they can explain the issues with probably more credibility than even you have. They can access the network. For your EU interlocutors, because they will obviously appreciate seeing the decision maker face to face and hear directly from the front lines. And for you, that's also an opportunity because you can show internally the added value of your work. So when planning for the visit, make sure you include obviously your key EU interlocutors in the Commission, members of the European Parliament, the External Action Service, different representatives of different countries, EU countries with which you have natural ties, such as Portugal for the Portuguese-speaking countries, or France or Spain or any others. Trying to meet fellow compatriots from your region, like civil society organizations. And last but not least, definitely try to include communication and visibility in your planning for the Brussels visit, either by including media interviews or speaking opportunities or social media publications. This is definitely an opportunity. I will expand a bit about communication in a minute, but this is definitely an opportunity for you to gain momentum and give more visibility to your issues and to your positions. And perhaps the final thing to say here, as far as good lobbying practices are concerned, is that it's important to time these interventions well if you want to take advantage of the momentum and give visibility for your issues. So for example, timing meetings or timing interventions with big conferences and agenda-setting initiatives like the EU Green Week or the European Development Days or the World Economic Forum at Davos, not necessarily based in Brussels, or even with thematic days, or with conversations that are taking place in the media and social media. These are all opportunities where you can insert your voice in a broader conversation and gain additional visibility. So that's the lobbying side of making your points across. If we go to the next slide, we'll focus on the third area where I think I think is important for you to think about, and where a few tips on good practices are in order. Really, communication is, in my opinion, from what I've seen in the past few years, really an increasing trend, and the way communication interacts with lobbying is really something that public affairs professionals and anyone, frankly, who works in the EU context needs to think about, especially in terms of digital communication. The better place to start, though, is not the platform, is actually the narrative, and this is where you should start when you think about communication. Think about how to tailor your message to your specific audiences. And the rationale here is to provide context as well as facts. Give your interlocutors the big picture, but show at the same time how individual people at home will be affected by those, and how that ties into EU issues and priorities. So bringing evidence to the front, from the front line to your interlocutors. The book also has an excellent chapter on this, actually, by Laura Shields. So I won't go too much into detail, but it's definitely the place to start. Think about your narrative and how you want to put your message and your points out there. The second thing that you can think about is events and speaking opportunities, and consider participating or organizing those. These initiatives don't really replace traditional forms of lobbying like direct contacts or direct meetings with your EU interlocutors, but rather they strengthen them. So this is an opportunity to go beyond those meetings and influence other stakeholders, potentially even a broader number of stakeholders, as well as the broader context in which policy decisions are made. And the good news is that, well, good news that comes from obviously a not such a good state of things, but it's true that the recent restrictions that COVID-19 has imposed on us makes it much more likely and much more normal to have virtual events and virtual speaking opportunities. So it's much easier and cheaper, frankly, and more flexible than before to organize virtual events. And these can be anything from something organized by you to an event like the European Development Days, which takes place, I believe, every June. And the topic this year is the Green Deal and sustainability. So that's actually an event that attracts a lot of people and a lot of attention for those of you interested in development. And perhaps the final thing that I would say, coming back to a previous point that I made, is that you should definitely consider what will be your approach to engaging with European media and what's going to be your strategy towards social media. As they say, if you're not there, on social media, making your points, getting your message across, someone else will define and speak about your message for you. So it's something that you should definitely consider, and that gives an opportunity for organization to put their voice and their arguments out there. It's definitely a rising trend. Surveys of the EU bubble show that, especially Twitter. Decision makers are increasingly turning to social media in the way they consume information and in the way they engage with others. Our own council surveys, public affairs council surveys, show that digital is increasingly important, and people see the results. So communication and online communication does get you noticed, and it's up to you to decide how much of it you'll want, but you definitely will want to have it. So I think I'm a bit beyond my time. I will now shut up and give the floor over to Roland for his intervention. Roland, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Joao. Yes, that was brilliant. And I mean, on your last point, I was sort of doing a little bit of research just now on the social media accounts of these third countries, and actually, I was very impressed to see that Ethiopia is #1, and that probably is because of legacy issues also with Belgium, because it's a representation to Belgium, Luxembourg, and the EU, which is often quite the case for many of these countries. The US mission next, so the Ethiopia had 38,000 followers, US mission 24,000, China 20,000 almost, Turkey 11,000, Israel 10,000. Of course, these are all followers, and the other things around reach and who you're following and content, but very interesting sort of assessment there. The UK with 10,000 followers as well. So no, sorry, 19,000. So it's up there. So I'm Roland Moore. I am. That was a extra bit of information for you there, picking up on the point that Yao had made. I'm a former diplomat, former UK government civil servant, having worked in the council as an environment attaché for the UK, having never really needed to think about what it means to be a third country until recently. So it's very new to me. And like Yao, I'm very sort of, intrigued and fascinated by this world, which is so multifaceted and so multidimensional and so dependent on, whether it's a customs union you're in, association agreement, an FTA, a deep FTA, or a partnership and cooperation agreement. There's so many sort of umbrella approaches that sort of govern this. And then of course there's the companies themselves. So I'm going to say a few slides just about something that happened, 12 days ago that you may have heard of, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit, also picking up the point that Alan and Joel has made with a case study of Norway, and then finally just some slides to bring it together, because I know we should get to the questions pretty quickly because there's quite a few there. So I'll be going through these quite at some pace, so forgive me if it's quite quick. So the UK will be a new partner like no other. I mean, there is no simply other way of framing it. The UK and the EU have been together for 47 years. But so the EU has, the UK has been preparing to do this work as a UK mission. It changed its name from UKREP to UK Miss. And indeed, it's here to stay. There was a sort of question about whether or not they would be, but and a question has gone up in the chat, you absolutely need to have representation here. And UK Miss, as it's known also in New York and in Geneva, UK Miss, UK mission to the EU, has been preparing for this day for a while. And, as an ex-EU member, as Alan was saying, the institutional memories there, the connections are there, the insights are there into the Commission, into the Council members, and into the Parliament, as well as the other stakeholders and chambers of commerce. So they will leverage this through their public diplomacy. We'll likely see a leaner UK Miss. We're expecting to see some slimmed down changes to the UK's approach. It won't be mirroring anymore the council setup like in Coreper. So we'll have to slim down and group together activities under broad categorizations, political perhaps, or economic, or perhaps development, and focusing on global Britain. Global Britain is the focus, and climate and digital and sustainability. And if you go to the UK's Twitter feed, you'll see campaigns around climate change, because we've got the COP26 that's happening at the end of the year. So that there's a campaign at the moment around, together, working together for the climate. So next slide, please, Nick. As we move forward with pace, as I mentioned, this is the second slide to describe why the UK will be a new partner like no other, as well as its insights and its insider knowledge. Look at that. I mean, that's a huge amount of, in the bottom left-hand corner, trade. That's the goods, imports and exports. The next one there is Switzerland, and then the next one's Turkey, and then Norway. And this kind of measures your the level of intensity of your trade, and then of course the size of that trade. And so the intensity is quite high with the UK trade-wise, and then as we go up, it's sort of the lower intensity. And then in the top right hand side, you can see there are Mercosur is there, which is Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela, even though that agreement's not quite there yet. Mexico, Singapore, Japan, very, very tiny overall sums, and the arrangement is much further away than the UK has. So the UK's geography and current trade intensity of goods with the EU will lead to did lead to then a robust level playing field safeguards in the 1,246 page trade and cooperation agreement, which I hope you've all flicked through over the Christmas. Maybe not. And that's done to avoid unfair competitive advantages, socioeconomic wise. And then the UK is really important that we'll switch to its focus now to committees overseeing the agreement. So getting involved in these committees, whether it's on SPS, whether it's on the other technical barriers to trade, and it'll be looking at making sure that the timings work for them and getting the most of that formal engagement to frame its engagement. Next slide, please, as I move forward with pace. So the UK, final slide of why it's like no other partner. As I mentioned, UK goods trade service, imports and exports is worth 197 billion, which is Canada, Japan, South Korea combined. So that previous slide, the bubbles, the size of the bubbles shows that. The main EU partner for exports in 2019 was the US, and then the UK and China. There's no way of avoiding that. The UK will always be in this category. And then China was the most important partner for the imports, and then US and UK. But unlike with the UK, there's no formal mechanism between the EU and any of the other following US, China, Russia, and India. So diplomacy will be key for those countries. be very interesting to see just exactly how those committees work for the UK, given the size of that trade and the amount of issues that are going to come up. So I want to move now quickly into the case study, which is the public diplomacy in the EU, the case of Norway. Look, Norway House, look how wonderful it is. Look at it, staring down the Berlaymont. Look at that impressive building in the heart of the EU. The Norwegians mean business. You know, they're here to stay. Obviously, they're part of the, you know, EU, EEA, the economic area, as a rule taker, you might say. But they don't do that lightly. They don't just sit back. They're here to influence. They're here to get involved. And as Alan said, they're here to lobby. Despite that special access, or leveraging that special access, leveraging that special role they have as a diplomatic mission. So this is just an example of how wonderful that building is. Look at that auditorium they have there, the ability to host events when we will be back in Brussels, hopefully with events. The next slide, please, Nick. And Norway used this to really good effect on plastics ban. So you may have seen that basically Norway led a highly successful campaign over the course of 2018 and 2019 to secure EU support, excuse me for typo, for its proposal at the UN to ban plastic dumping. So it set up events in Brussels. It spoke to different member states. It spoke to the Commission. It got buy-in. It went to Basel. It got that done in Basel. I was there actually. I was following this for the event in Basel in May 2019, and this happened. You know, the IPEN, the NGOs, and the others, they massively, you know, praised Norway. Norway got a massive amount of kudos for this, and it took a long time to get to that place, and over commitments from ministers. Just a really good example of using that status, getting involved in Euro active events in Brussels, porting that across to different capitals in Europe, and getting a result internationally. So, you know, as Joao was saying, what is your business? What do you want to influence? What do you need to do? Why are you here? What is your purpose? What is the locus that you want to sort of convey and get across? You know, when I was in the Perm Rep in 2013 to 16, it was all about TTIP. So if you met an American diplomat, or if you met an American, it was 9 out of 10 chances they were there to influence on TTIP, which of course we haven't had. Maybe the Australians are here to influence on a trade deal that they want, and they have these annual barbecues and these annual events. There's a really good Australian barbecue that's taking place in Saint-Contenaire. I know it's really there, I think, you know, to kind of promote the Australian trade and meat and agriculture, and because, you know, I imagine they are really keen for a trade deal. And you know, Mercosur is next. Perhaps that's one on the agenda. Brazil and Argentina and others. Perhaps that will be their main reason. But what about if you take the case of, say, for the Canadians and the Israel, you know, they are also looking at the chemicals policy and technical barriers to trade. And so they actually participate in committee meetings that are there because of their privileged access. They can observe what's going on in those chemicals committees. So different things that you care about, you might have to do different things at once. The next slide, please, to bring it all together, which is to say, yeah, three things and I'm list 5, because that's really bad. But it's prioritize, understand the process, be clear on why you're there. It should have been 5 things. Know your strengths and what you bring to the table, and hone your networking skills. So yeah, prioritize, have a small set of things that you care about and that you stand for. Is it digital, climate, human rights, or is it your trade deal that you want? We talked about the processes before. Joao mentioned that very clearly. You know what it is. When a decision is being taken, are those decisions that are being made in the council, in the parliament, or are those only in the commission internally, or are those actually the decisions being made at member state level? So know that. You know, as Joao was saying also, you know, be clear on why you care. It's a win-win, you know, how that relates to the EU and why they should care. So think win-win in all these situations. Even if you're not an EU country, you'll have EU, there'll be EU dimensions to anything that you do. And I think that plays to the 4th point, knowing your strengths and what you bring to the table. And as Alan has very eloquently put forward about your networking skills, both individually, as an organization, both online and offline. There's loads of things that you can be doing, and this is a lovely picture. I'll leave you. The UK was for years a sort of outside the Eurozone, outside the committee on the Eurozone. And of course, my colleagues in the ECOFIN were just like this gentleman here, with their ear to the door, listening to what was going on, taking notes, and being clear, what that meant for the UK. And I think, that's a very interesting sort of insight into sort of one of the aspects of, how the UK will also need to continue doing that. But information in Brussels is key. I will pause there. We've got 10 more minutes to go, and that would be great to have some questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Roland, and thank you as well, obviously, to Alan and Joao for their presentations as well. This is obviously a very, very interesting topic, and I've seen that we've had quite a few questions already pop into the chat. So I'm going to invite Joao and Alan to turn their cameras on to join us again, and we will start dealing with some of the questions. And Alan's done a brilliant job of responding to people already in the chat, which is great. There's an opportunity for Roland and Joao to answer any of the points. So one of the questions I will highlight in the first instance is from Arthur Rocco regarding Brazilian agro lobbying strategy to face the Amazon fires. How would you evaluate the Brazilian agricultural lobbying strategy to face the Amazon fires and advance with the EU-Mercosur agreement? And in the first instance, I wanted to pick Roland up on this with your background of environment and that area, and see if you have any thoughts with regards to that.
I really don't. I haven't been following it close. I know this has been a block, and I know Mercosur is a priority to have that done on the EU side. With Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Venezuela, and Uruguay, and I know that I think there was some issues related to President Macron for France's opposition to the deal because of these measures around what's going on in Brazil. We've all seen it. And we've all been very appalled, going back to the beginning of last year. Recently, I don't know what the sort of steps and the measures are. I know that the German presidency wanted to sort of unlock talks on this. I don't know enough about what the agricultural associations from Brazil are doing. I do know that Brazil, I looked at the list, they're only 1,000, the mission to the EU only has 1,000 followers, so they could be doing more online. But I don't know if there's something that you would like, anyone else would like to comment on this, because it's not specifically something that I've been following as to whether or not it's a good or bad thing. But I think in general, if this speaks to the point of that, there is things to be agreed in Brussels, and there are things at the moment, that needs to be unlocked. So if they want to feel like they should unlock it, that could be one way of doing it. But I haven't really been following the whys and the who and the wheres and the who's, the right and the wrongs on this one.
All right, just pick up on that, Roland, because I think there's actually a very important point in here. So actually what you see with this, which is not uncommon with a lot of other agreements that the EU is dealing with at the moment, is the technicalities of the trade agreement have been signed. That was an incredibly long negotiation, but nonetheless the trade aspect has been dealt with. But what has been neglected has been this environmental political aspect of things that surround its approval, which again comes down to the European Parliament. And I think, in answer to the question, what have they been doing? My first answer would be clearly not enough with regard to the European Parliament in the first instance, because that should have been foreseen and could potentially have been managed. I'm not saying it would have been easy. What have they been doing since? Like Roland, I'm not following this particularly closely, but I can only imagine they're on some sort of environmental charm offensive to try and get this over the line now, because that's literally where they are. But it's a good example of some of the types of activities that become increasingly important to deal with now. It's not just purely about the trade negotiators and the trade agreement. There's a broader context, and that cannot be missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if I may just to add a quick point, it's sustainability and the environment and the Green Deal is really one of the topics that the EU is pushing really strongly right now. Perhaps the most relevant point in the EU agenda. So it's bound to be a sensitive topic. It's bound to be something that is going to generate a lot of discussion. And frankly, if there is a topic that requires companies and countries to have a solid and well thought out public affairs strategy, this is definitely one of them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've got a question in the chat from Nazar, and I think this is almost certainly directed at João. What are the advantages of membership in the EU Public Affairs Council, and is it open to organizations from third countries? So it's an opportunity for you to promote your company, your boss, your employer.
Yeah. So I'll do my elevator pitch here, right? No, thank you very much, Nazar, for the question, and obviously happy to chat more offline about this. But basically, the Public Affairs Council gathers companies and associations and their other organizations globally, and not just in the EU or in the United States. So it is open to non-EU countries and organizations. And basically, we try to promote peer-to-peer discussions on horizontal issues related to lobbying and public affairs. So, you know, what are best practices in doing a stakeholder mapping? What does your peer from another association or another company think of good ways to map your issues and identify risks? So these horizontal issues that relate to companies that can work in very different industries. The Council does not do lobbying on any specific policy issues. That should be clear. So it's not a consultancy, a public affairs consultancy. Roland could speak to you about that if needed. But it's more about discussing horizontal topics and best practice and sort of getting people in touch with one another to discuss these issues.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that answer and that brilliant elevator pitch. I've got a question for, unless Roland wants to add anything, I've got another question for Roland. Are companies from third countries better off to go it alone to influence EU decisions or work via their governments?
So we see a lot of lobbying in Brussels from companies that are, you know, from or headquartered in countries that are outside the EU, while also noting that there's a lot of transnational nature of companies these days, as well as headquarters in Europe. So what does it mean to be outside? What does it mean to be, I think, not from Europe? And if you have significant assets and resources in Europe, then, you know, you're quasi also represented by that member state for where you have your biggest footprint. So I think there's also therefore a need to work within the member states' perspective and work with those member states that you've had the strongest connections with. I think it's always wise to have separate intelligence and monitoring, because you cannot anticipate and expect your mission in Brussels on the ground to be looking at your issue, your case, and then feeding that back to you via, you know, the mission to the trade mission or the foreign affairs mission, embassy, sending diplomatic telegrams back to, you know, Washington or Caracas, and then subsequently filtering down to different departments, who then will have, you know, stakeholder activity and then relay that to you. You know, that's quite removed. Obviously, on the other hand, as Alan was saying, all the diplomatic advantage of having access when, you know, a president or a minister will visit Brussels, and engage with senior people, particularly like it also with the European Parliament delegations, you know, that's significant and that's highly important. And one should, you know, if you've got a major issue and it's a possibility for it to be on the government's agenda, and it should be number 1, 2, or 3 in that bilateral. So getting it on that number 1, 2, or 3 in the bilateral would greatly elevate your issue. Talk about Amazon. That would be one of the issues there, wouldn't it? So that would be my sort of response to sort of the go it alone. And I think, as João was saying, it's never good to go alone. Always need to be flanked with partners. So I think that would be how I respond to that question.
Thank you very much for that, Roland. We have a comment and a question from Anna Maria. Firstly, never thought we'd reach the moment of presenting the UK as a third country, but here we are. She wanted to ask what changes happened in public affairs with regards to communications, especially around digital, with that playing a greater role. How do you perceive EU institutions adapting to this new environment? I'll leave it open for someone to answer that one.
are we referring to, I imagine this is the new COVID environment, or the new environment of digital communications, because there's two sort of aspects to that. So I think that we recently did our EU media poll in the BCW, and I could point you towards Googling EU media poll, where we asked different, people in the Commission and the Parliament how they like to receive information, and mostly it's okay, face to face, but one-to-one engagements, and it's mostly with experts who bring information that's detailed. So I think that that's always going to be important. I think the media sources, the FT, Reuters, Economist, Politico, Euroactiv, and then for MEPs, actually, it's Twitter as well, features in the top 5. So those are all excellent sources on media. And I think that, you have to see that there are very successful campaigns, particularly NGOs can do amazing campaigns online to get their issue taken up. So one should always take that into account. So I think this is indeed, this was how I wanted to sort of approach this. And I think, yes, at the moment under COVID situation, I think we are all struggling to meetings are online like this webinar, and we're having increasingly trying to make sure we have one-to-one sessions with senior people in the Commission and the Parliament. Those are taking place. It's probably a bit of fatigue, but we should see that is something that is here to stay for the foreseeable future, given that there's no return to office or even to the Parliament, for instance, which is always my first barometer of when we're going to be going back, when the Parliament goes back. So I don't know if Alan, you would like to add anything to that?
I think I'm just looking at the chat about Anna Maria's putting in about the longer term trend. I think you covered it, Roland. I think, yes, you can't ignore this. There's a lot of noise, a lot of conversation, a lot of campaigns that are run purely in the digital space, but still at the end of the day, there remains a key and important place for human contact, human relationships, human networks, and one-to-one meetings. But yes, I think it'll be interesting to see how the balance, what balance comes once there is the opportunity to meet and do things in person again, where we land after the crisis. So that will be interesting.
Excellent, thank you. And Joao, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, Roland and Alan said everything, and I fully agree. And by the way, that an advice to Ana Maria, if you can look at that BCW poll, it's really interesting. I think you guys did 2, right? In the past 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, you did 2 of those surveys, and they're really useful. We did a digital survey last year in December, so COVID was not a thing then, or at least certainly not like it is today. And the trend there was definitely already in the direction of companies and organizations and associations are engaging more and more. They're investing more in digital. They are engaging more, and they are seeing results. And interestingly, also senior leadership is sort of more buys into the success of this. So your boss or the CEO or the vice president of your company or association, he will understand that this is an important thing. Certainly under COVID, and we did another survey around May, well, virtual is here to stay. Interestingly, and I don't know if it was Roland or Helen who were mentioning this, virtual is here to stay, but digital public affairs are not overwhelming more traditional forms of lobbying. So picking up the phone, meeting people, your typical position paper, that still counts a lot, and that has a lot of information and traction. So that, don't forget those things. And finally, perhaps to the last part of your question, how do you perceive EU people, EU institutions adapting to this new environment? I think they are adapting quite quickly, or as quickly as an EU institution, a big institution, can adapt. Communication, especially digital, is increasingly everywhere. In the EU, you see a proliferation of Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, for EU delegations, for commissioners, for MEPs. And I actually had a conversation a few weeks ago with someone who works in the EAS, and they were saying that they do follow, for example, the accounts of ministries of foreign affairs, and they know what's there. They know what people are posting, and they know what's being written. So they are definitely tuning to this as well. And so if they are there, if everybody's there, there's probably a reason you and other associations and organizations should be there too.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, João. We've gone slightly over time, but it's always important to let everyone have an opportunity to ask questions and ask our contributors to be able to answer that. As I mentioned, this webinar is going to be available on John Harper Publishing website. At the beginning, we had a bit of a technical issue with John. Hopefully we can bring him online just for him to say a quick piece. I will just add him back into the call. John, can you hear us?
I can indeed, Nick.
Excellent.
I'm glad to say that I managed to catch most of the webinar. Though I did miss the first part. I mean, I had intended simply to say some words of welcome and introduce the speakers, which obviously has gone down the river now, that situation. And I'd just like to thank them all for their efforts in preparing for these sessions. There's a lot of work has to go into creating slides and thinking about the topics to be presented. So thank you to all three of the presenters. Thank you also to everybody who turned up. I hope you found the session enjoyable. We will be doing further events in the Public Affairs Insider series in the coming weeks. So if you haven't done so, please do register on the John Harper Publishing website. It's the certain way that we will contact you when events are coming up and send you links and so on. Thank you very much again to all involved, and we'll look forward to the next event. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Thank you to Roland, João, and Alan, and thank you for everyone for attending and your questions. And as John said, we look forward to welcoming you at the next webinar. And in the meantime, I hope everyone stays safe and has an enjoyable rest of their week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.